I usually do a little intro thingy at the beginning of the video, but I did run out of time, so we'll be jumping straight into things this time. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Tempestfall is an action-adventure game, and in today's video I'm looking at the Meta Quest version, which is priced at $24.99 US. But the game is also available via PC VR for $29.99, and you can get it on the Steam, Oculus and Viveport platforms. But in today's video I'm looking at the Meta Quest 2 version, and it is only available on the Meta Quest 2, not the Quest 1. I want to be clear that I've played about 4 hours of Tempestfall, when the game takes about 8 to 10 hours to complete, so I'm told. So it seems that I'm just under halfway, and this review is based off of that. So in the first part I give an overview of the game, and in the second part I give my thoughts on the game so far. Warhammer Age of Sigmar Tempestfall is a Warhammer game set in the Age of Sigmar universe. For anyone unfamiliar with Age of Sigmar, it's a fantasy tabletop game featuring melee weapons and magic. There are different warring factions in the game, and in Tempestfall you play a faction called the Stormcast. These are superhuman, nigh immortal warriors whose souls have been magically reforged by the will of the God King Sigmar. A Stormcast can stand upwards of 9 feet tall, and when they fall in battle, their soul is reforged and reborn to carry on fighting the forces of chaos. The forces of chaos you fight against in this game are the Nighthaunt. These are cursed undead souls with a fathomless hatred for the living. Tempestfall's campaign begins by following the devastating event known as the Necroquake in the realm of death, known as Shyish. The massive explosion of dark magic has triggered the Nighthaunt forces to rise up all across the mortal realms. As Lord Arcanum Castor Stormscryer, you have to investigate this new threat to the mortal realms. That is your quest for the game. This means battling skeletons, wraiths and other foul undead creatures using magical sword and 2 types of staff. Now these weapons can be used to bash your opponent medieval style, or to cast powerful storm magic. There's runes along the side of the weapon that, when filled, allow you to cast a spell. Weapon damage and magic effects can be added and upgraded by using resources like Sigmarite ore and scrolls that you'll find along the way. Your hands can also be used to fight and cast an offensive bolt of lightning. While these are your main weapons, you do have other equipment and artifacts like a torch to light the way, and these vials which hold a human soul and act like a kind of ancient hand grenade. Now beyond fighting, there are some simple puzzles to solve and interactive parts of the environment like climbable objects, openable chests, switches, levers, that kind of thing. So that's a real simple overview of the game. Now we've gone over that, let's go into my review. So I'm going to spend the first part of this review and most of my time talking about combat, because that's what you'll be doing a lot of the time in this game, and that's really where the core of the gameplay is. So the combat is good, but it's certainly not the best combat experience I've had. So starting with the good stuff, there's a parry system that makes fighting more involved than just waving your weapon around, and while you only have 3 weapons to play with, they can be upgraded, and you do get to launch different magic attacks with each one. Some magic attacks are more focused, while others are more area of effect damage, which introduces some strategy too. You have to decide which weapon magic combination is best to use for each situation. There are also some cool moves that you can pull off, like tearing off a skeleton's head and throwing the bodies at their comrades. But all of this isn't enough to stop the combat from getting a bit stale in places, a bit repetitive. At the start of the game you'll be encountering many skeletons and Nighthaunt that attack in a fairly similar way with a samey attack sequence. They're also quite easy to kill. It does pick up though later on in the game, with enemies getting tougher and having a bit more variety in their attacks. So it's nice to see some variety later on in the game, but it would have been good to see this sooner to help stop things get repetitive. The combat itself works fairly well. It's a smooth experience for the most part. At times It felt like I was just whacking away at thin air instead of burying my weapon into an undead. And I guess feeling like you're swinging a weapon through air is kind of appropriate if you're fighting ghosts and wraiths, but it would have been nice to have seen more reaction from your enemies when they get whacked, something to make you really feel like you're controlling the mighty arm of a Lord Arcanum. There were other times when my weapon didn't register a hit, when I was also pretty certain that it had connected, so there might be some hit detection issues here too. And there's a couple of smaller gripes for me as well. So the weapons use a gesture based magic system. Sometimes it wouldn't register my gestures, and I can admit that it might be a problem with the way I was doing it, but some of the gestures were so simple, like raising a weapon above your head, that I'm not sure how I could get it wrong. This actually became a bit annoying because it happened fairly often. Now one last thing, again another small gripe, but weapon selection is done using a wheel system. Now it's not terrible, but I didn't find it to be the best way to change weapons, particularly in the heat of combat. It can be quite clunky. I would have at least preferred the option to have weapons on your person. So reach behind to grab your staff, or reach down to your right leg to grab your sword, and so on. This would definitely be achievable given you only handle 3 main weapons in the game.
This is someone's memory. A cruel death in a cruel time.
Another thing I noticed is that sometimes the AI was a bit thick really. Enemies tended to either rush me or would sometimes watch and kind of wait their turn for a beating, like something out of an 80s action film where a group of bad guys attack the hero one by one. So I don't want to give the impression here that the combat is bad. It certainly works, and I think it can be fun, especially in shorter stints, but it certainly has its issues. Now moving beyond the combat, the levels are a visual treat. What Tempestfall does well is the gloomy atmospheric tombs and the open landscapes with a sense of scale. The massive doors, the towering statues and the blighted landscapes are awe-inspiring and, well, just really cool to look at. Stages are kind of linear, but there are a few different paths, shortcuts and nooks to explore. You'll also find resources hidden throughout the environments, which gives you plenty of motivation to explore your surroundings. It has some nice touches too, like needing to use a smith's hammer to upgrade your weapon. Or using your torch to burn through the gnarled roots that block your path. The story elements are all here. It has an interesting story that feels serious, dark, and, well, just Warhammer-y really, just like it should. They've really nailed the feeling of a Warhammer game. You'll also pick up books giving you some of the Warhammer lore and history. The books are just slabs of text though that you have to read through. It would have been nice to at least to have some pictures to make them more interesting to read. There's plenty of options for movement and comfort, so you can really tailor your experience to your playstyle. And there are also a couple of game modes to be aware of. There's a hardcore mode that makes the game harder by removing things like parry indicators and having enemies do more damage, that kind of thing. There's also the Storm Trials and Arena Fighting mode. Now the concept is a familiar one, and it's a bit like a roguelike game, where you kill enemies, then you collect loot to help you progress. The enemies get harder the further you get, and once you die you can use the ore that you earned during your sessions to purchase weapons and things for your next run. Now it's still in beta, but from what I've played they've really pulled it off quite well, and it adds quite a lot of value to the game. So overall, from what I've played, it's a good game. It wouldn't be fair for me to rate it as I've not completed it yet, but I'd recommend it as long as you can overlook some of the flaws with the combat. It has some nice level design, some really cool environments, and an engaging story with a decent amount of content. I enjoyed the combat too, it just needs a little work. So that's it for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, to give it a thumbs up, and if you really like what you see, you might even want to consider subscribing. Thanks for watching as always, and I hope to catch you in the next one.